Hi, want to learn about support vector machine regression a bit? You are at the right place.
Hey there, I'm Insha.
And I am Niveditha.
We are the members of Group 5 of course CS460 taught by Dr. Subhankar Mishra.
Those who are in machine learning or data science are quite familiar with the term like SVM or support vector machine. But support vector regression is a bit different from support vector machine. Now we know that support vector machine is a supervised machine learning algorithm that tries to find the optimal hyperplane for the data points in n-dimensional space where n is the number of features. And regression analysis is a way of mathematically sorting out which of these variables does indeed have an impact. It answers the question which factors matter the most, which can be ignored, how do these factors interact with each other, and perhaps most importantly, how certain are we about all these factors? So what will be a sphere? Well, that's what this video is all about.
So let's get started. In today's agenda, we'll be learning about some basics of support vector regression. We are covering mainly 3 points and they are understanding SVM regression, mathematical intuition behind support vector machine, example of SVR using Python, pros and cons of support vector regression. Under support vector machine regression, we'll be talking more on related terms, regression, support vector machine, and theory behind. So, by the end of this video, you'll have a better idea about what support vector regression is, how it's different from SVM, how it works, how to implement it, its drawbacks, and so on.
Now, let's understand all the terms behind. First one, machine learning. Machine learning is the study of computer algorithms that can improve automatically through experience and by the use of data. It is the study of making machines more human-like in their behavior and decisions by giving them the ability to learn and develop their own programs. This is done with minimum human intervention, that is, no explicit programming. The learning process is automated and improved based on the experience of the machines throughout the process. Good quality data is fed to machines and different algorithms are used to build ML models to train the machines on this data.
So yeah, in short, machine learning is a data analytics technique that teaches computers to do what comes naturally to humans and animals. Now about supervised learning. Type of machine learning which makes use of labeled datasets to train algorithms to classify data or predict outcomes accurately. Supervised learning is a type of machine learning in which machines are trained using well-labeled training data, and on basis of their data, machines predict the output. The labeled data means some input data is already tagged with the correct output. In supervised learning, the training data provided to the machines work as a supervisor that teaches the machines to predict the output correctly. It applies the same concept as a student learns in the supervision of the teacher. The aim of a supervised learning algorithm is to find a mapping function to map the input variable with the output variable.
Now, about the third one, regression. It is a statistical procedure used to identify the degree and the type of a connection between one dependent variable and a set of other factors. It falls under supervised learning, wherein the algorithm is trained with both input features and output labels. It helps in establishing a relationship among the variables.
Now, more on regression. Regression is a predictive modeling technique which investigates the relationship between dependent and independent variables. This type of analysis helps us to understand how the value of the dependent variable is changing corresponding to an independent variable when other independent variables are held fixed. It predicts continuous or real values such as temperature, age, salary, price, etc. The ultimate goal of the regression algorithm is to plot a best fit line or a curve between the data.
Now we can apply machine learning in our day-to-day life to make it easier. Let's list the use of regression, which are predictive analysis, operation efficiency, supporting decisions, correcting errors, getting new insights, etc. So let me give also a real-life example for regression In a business, if we want to find whether a factor is impacting a portion of the business, we can use regression to allocate resources efficiently.
Types of SVM or support vector machine. Let's compare the two types of support vector machine which fall under supervised algorithm. Shown are two types, regression and classification. Regression predictive modeling is the task of approximating a mapping function from input variables to a continuous output variable. A continuous output variable is a real value such as integer or floating point value. These are often quantities such as amounts and sizes. Classification predictive modeling is the task of approximating a mapping function from input variables to discrete output variables. The output variables are often called labels or categories. The mapping function predicts the class or category for a given observation. Now, observe the figure. We can see one is regression and the other is classification. In the regression diagram, we can see that it finds the best fit curve for the dataset indicated by the dashed line. We can see that there are two types of triangles, one in red, other in blue. We'll explain about it later. In the classification diagram, we can see that the data is of two classes, blue triangles and red squares. The SVM classification has successfully classified this into two sections. We can also see the dotted line separating them.
Okay, let's discuss the basic idea behind SVR. What does SVR do? Support vector regression is quite different from other regression models. It uses a support vector machine, which is commonly used as a classification algorithm, to predict a continuous variable, while other linear regression models try to minimize the error between the predicted and the actual value. Support vector regression tries to fit the best line within a predefined or threshold error value. What SVR does in this sense, it tries to classify the prediction line in two types. One that passes through the error boundary, that is a space separated by two parallel lines, and the ones that does not. Those lines which do not pass the error boundary are not considered, as the difference between the predicted value and the actual value exceeded the error threshold epsilon. The lines that pass are considered for a potential support vector to predict the value of an unknown.
Now, let's look what the hyperparameters of support vector machine are. Before that, what is hyperparameters? A hyperparameter is a parameter that is set before the learning process begins. These parameters are tunable and can directly affect how well a model trains. Hyperparameters are adjustable parameters you choose to train a model that governs the training process itself. They are important because they directly control the behavior of the training algorithm and have a significant impact on the performance of the model being trained. The hyperparameters of support vector machine are kernel, boundary line, hyperplane, and support vectors.
Kernel is a function that is used to map lower dimensional data points into higher dimensional data points. As SVR performs linear regression in a higher dimension, this function is crucial. There are many types of kernels such as polynomial kernel, Gaussian kernel, sigmoid kernel, etc. These are generally used for finding a hyperplane in the higher dimensional space. Hyperplane in support vector machine. A hyperplane is a line used to separate two data classes in a higher dimension than the actual dimension. In support vector regression, a hyperplane is a line that is used to predict continuous value. These are used to plot the required line that shows the predicted output of the algorithm. Support vectors. In regression, support vectors are those points that lie outside this epsilon 2. The smaller the value of epsilon, the more points that lie outside the tube, and hence, the greater the number of support vectors. We will talk more about epsilon tube later. In classification, the support vector is used to define the hyperplane that separates the two different classes. Boundary line. Two parallel lines drawn to the sides of support vectors with the error threshold value epsilon are known as the boundary lines. These lines create a margin between the data points. The boundary is trying to fit as many instances as possible without violating the margin. Here these vectors are used to perform linear regression. The width of the boundary is controlled by the error threshold epsilon.
Now, we can see two figures here. Concerning the first figure, it is a bivariate support vector regression model. The observations are shown by the blue dots. The predictions are shown by the orange 3D surface. Here, we can see the hyperplane has a maximum number of data points. So it shows that support vector regression can be used to give a best fit. Now, about the next figure. It is an example of 1D regression using three different kernels. First one is the RPF model, second is the linear model, and the third is the polynomial model. On comparing the three different kinds of kernels on the generated dataset, we can see that the second one, that is the linear model, is a poor fit of the dataset, whereas the other two, the RPF and polynomial models, they give much better results as they show a good fit. This shows the importance of selecting the right kernels for your dataset. The code for this will be discussed later.
Now, let us discuss about the mathematical intuition behind support vector machine regression. Support vector regression gives us the flexibility to define how much error is acceptable in our model and will find an appropriate line or hyperplane in higher dimension to fit our data. The basic idea is that, let's say there is a given training dataset. Our target is to find a function f of x that has at most epsilon deviation from target yi for all training data and at the same time is less complex or flat as possible. In other words, we do not care about errors as long as they are less than epsilon, but we will not accept any deviation larger than this.
Now, let us observe the first figure. We want to find one epsilon tube that can contain all the samples. Intuitively, a tube with a small width seems to overfit with the training data. We should find f of x such that its epsilon tube's width is as big as possible. That is, more generalization capability, less prediction error in future. As you can see, epsilon is the threshold error, and it is the marginal distance between the hyperplane and the outer line. Now on the left, we have the optimization problem. So we have to minimize half of norm beta whole square, such that yi minus f of xi is less than or equal to epsilon, f of xi minus yi is less than or equal to epsilon.
With a defined epsilon, this problem is not always feasible. So we also want to allow some error. So here we use the slack variable psi and psi star. The concept of slack variable is simple. For any value that falls outside of epsilon, we can denote its deviation from the margin xi, and then our optimization problem becomes to minimize the half norm of beta square plus c summation over I equal to 1 to n of psi I plus psi I star, such that it gives yi minus f of xi less than or equal to epsilon plus psi I star, and of f of xi minus yi less than or equal to epsilon plus psi I, and psi I and psi I star are greater than or equal to 0.
But wait, what is epsilon and c? Parameter epsilon controls the width of the epsilon insensitive tube. The value of epsilon can affect the number of support vectors used to construct the regression function. The bigger epsilon, the fewer support vectors are selected. It is associated with a loss function, that is, epsilon insensitive loss function, quadratic loss function, or Hubbard loss function, etc. Parameter C determines the trade-off between the model complexity, that is the fatness, and the degree to which deviations larger than epsilon are tolerated. It is interpreted as a traditional regularization parameter that can be estimated by cross-validation, for example.
Time to do some coding. In this section, we will understand the use of support vector regression with the help of a dataset. Here we are going to predict the salary of an employee. So first we are going to import the library. We are here importing NumPy to do mathematical operation on arrays, pandas for reading, and importing data, and MATLAB for visualization. So now, let's import the dataset. We can display the dataset using dataset.head. Next step is to get the x and y variables. The salary column is the dependent data and the level is taken as the independent data. Next, we does the feature scale. Here we can see the data that for the salary is from 45,000 to 1,10,000, while the level is from 1 to 5. Using this, it will transform our data such that its distribution will have a mean value at 0 and standard deviation 1. That is, it standardizes a feature by subtracting the mean and then scaling to unit radians. So now we get the data scaled. We are going to use this into SVR. So we are going to import SVR from sklearn. For kernel, we are here using the default value RPF, and we can check what the result will be. We can ignore this warning now. So next, we will, now that the SPR is featured in our data, we will visualize our result. For that, we are using matplotlib function. We can give the S label as position level and the Y label as salary. The graph plotted here, we can see the red points shows the data points and the blue line shows the prediction that we get. The last point, our model takes it as an outlier, as this lies in an abnormal distance from other values. This avoids overfitting.
In this, we will see different kernels applied to the same generated dataset. We'll use RBF, linear and polynomial kernels to fit the data. First, here we have imported NumPy, Matplotlib and SVM. Then we have generated the sample data. The np.sort returns a sorted copy of an array. Random.range gives random value in the given shape. And then we added noise to targets. We add noise to the data to make it less able to memorize. Next, we fit the data with a regression model using RBF, linear and polynomial kernels. And then we visualize the results using Matplotlib library. On observing the results, we find that in the second one, that is the linear model, it is a poor fit of the dataset, whereas the other two, RBF and polynomial model, give much better results as they show a good fit.
So let's discuss the pros and cons. The advantages of SVR are decision model can be easily updated, the excellent generalization capability with high prediction accuracy, and the fact that it can be implemented easily. While the disadvantages of SVR are it is not suitable for large data sets and underperforming when the number of features for each data point exceeds the number of training data samples, and also it does not perform well when the dataset has more noise, that is, when the target classes are overlapping.
So let's recall. We started by getting familiarized with the terms machine learning, supervised learning, and regression.
Then we discussed in details about regression, what is it and its various uses.
We then compared support vector machine, regression, and classification using a diagram.
We then explored what support vector machine regression does, its theory and idea.
We looked into various hyperparameters, which are kernel, boundary line, hyperplane, support vectors. We discussed each of them in detail.
We then saw two graphical representation of SVR model.
We then discussed the mathematical intuition behind SVR and the different terms involved.
We then learned to code using support vector regression by modeling it on a dataset. Then we saw pros and cons of SVR.
So these are the references. The first two are two relevant papers. One, Support Vector Regression in Efficient Learning Machine, and the other is a tutorial on Support Vector Regression, Statistics and Computing. So let's wrap this up. So we hope you know a bit more about Support Vector Regression now, how it works, how it is implemented, and so on. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you.